Let's get also started with our next address for the gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we have the presence of the principal consultant and also the co-founder of Camaros Limited, an urban planning and zoning consulting firm in Chicago. And our speaker here is also active as a teacher and often holds the title of Urban Scholar at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So this morning, we'd now like to invite on stage the global head of LAI, Mr. Leslie Pollock, to please come on the stage and share his perspectives on capitalizing on current planning trends. Please put your hands together for Mr. Leslie Pollock.
Thank you and good morning. Before I begin my discussion of planning trends, I'd like to do two things. One, I'd like to echo earlier statements and express my regards to Mr. Anil Hatkar, who worked so hard to structure this presentation and conference for the next 3 days, but unfortunately could not be with us. Without him, we wouldn't be all here right now. So thank you, Mr. Hatkar. The other point I'd like to do is expand a minute on the notion of LAI, which the initials stand for Lambda Alpha International. It's actually started as an academic fraternity in the United States for dealing with issues of land economics. You know, as in India, we have many associations that allow for architects to meet, or for appraisers to meet, for financiers to meet, for realtors to meet. But this LAI is an opportunity for people of all these disciplines to meet and share ideas. We're all interested in the land, and we all bring differing expertise to this venture. And the interest is great that we're able to be here in India, and we owe it to Mr. Hatkar, because his thought was, how do we begin to create that kind of interaction here as well? And we're represented by actually 5 international presidents who are present here. And if I could ask them to rise, there's Tim Yeomans from Sacramento, California. There's Larry Lund from Chicago, Illinois. There is Phil Bonham. I don't know if Phil's in the room right now, from Vancouver. And you will see and hear from Steve Gregg from Los Angeles, who is the current president. Just a few words about what this organization is. It's 23 chapters. We're spread through North America and the United States and Canada. That's where we originated. And we operated on a notion that all real estate is local. Everybody who wants to deal in real estate really is dealing in a particular area, whether it's Mumbai or whether it's Pune or whether it's Delhi or wherever. But things have changed now, and real estate isn't just local anymore. Real estate is global. And that is why we are trying to expand the notion of this organization so that all of us who are members have, in essence, a global network of peers who we can meet with, talk with, share ideas with, and indeed share work opportunities with as well. We're a small organization because it's a distinguished organization. Its members only come by nomination and election. You can't join because you just want to. And so it keeps the high peer relationship together. There's academics, municipal officials, there are professionals from all these disciplines who meet to discuss challenges and the challenges of ideas and land economics, to facilitate contact and to support research. We're trying to grow the organization in a select manner because we know that this type of connection is important and it's global in its sense. So let me move from that kind of introduction to talking about the current planning trends and how we can all try and capitalize on it. One of the interesting things about my comments today is they don't apply specifically to Mumbai or specifically to India. They are global because we all share the same global problems, although some of us have greater challenges than others. And with the size of the population and the numbers of cities in India, the challenges are indeed great. If we look at Mumbai and we fly into Mumbai, you know, we see a region that is controlled and structured by its own challenges. We have the challenge of geography, that peninsula, the island, as it's referred to, which is very constrained in terms of development. And we know that the development there is structured by history. It evolves over time, and we know that it is continuously evolving through the nature of its economy. Now, when we fly into Mumbai, we see this exquisite city from a distance and this great new infrastructure that's there. But as Minister Kesekar had mentioned, the issue in planning is less on facilities than it is on improving the quality of life for people in the area that you're planning for, whether it's the state or it's the city. Because when we strip away the veneer of distance, we know the challenges that are in front of us. We know the tremendous transportation congestion and transportation challenges that we have. We know the housing challenges that we have, from high luxury housing to housing that's in extremely poor condition. And how do we address that issue? We know that we're altering our environment through greenhouse gases, and that the growing levels of pollution is not only bad for our health, but it's bad for the environment, and it's bad for the city. And we know that in the face of this, while people may not want to migrate to the city, they are. And if we look at this simple graph, which is out of date actually, you can see that urbanization nationally is at a point where we're better than the state of India, nation of India is better than 1/3 urbanized. So it might be 50% here in Maharashtra, but across the entire country, this is quite a challenge to have to deal with. So we have a whole series of common challenges that we have to face. And the only way you can face a challenge is by knowing where you're going, to be able to have a strong vision about the direction so we know how to make the investments in facility, how to make the investments in people, and how do we make the investments in the environment to move forward to that vision. And that means careful structure of growth management, managing the growth, not let the growth manage us. Now, the government has three big levers that it has to deal with. It has policy, the rules that it makes for its decisions as to where it's going to allocate its money. And it has capital that it can spend on a particular infrastructure. And it has regulations to set the rules for that development. But even with all those, we know the challenge is great. And you look at this map, we know there's at least 30 cities in India that's 1 million and over. There's probably more, but on the date of this map, there were 30 cities at 1 million and over. Well, maybe 1 million small when you take a look at the numbers in Mumbai, but 1 million is a lot of people in one place, and the management issues are really challenging. We look in, we know that we just can't think about the city itself. We know we have to think about the regional pattern, and when we look at the structure of Mumbai, we see there's these corridors that need to be served. But we can't think about the city by itself. We have to think about the city in a broader sense. Because if you look at this map here, and you look at those two red areas, this is Pune and Mumbai starting to grow together. And over time, as you drive the Pune-Mumbai highway, you start to see this megalopolis forming that's going to add even more numbers and more traffic and more challenges to us. And indeed, we know that Maharashtra is not an island. It's part of a great nation, and their population is through the entire area. So looking at that, we need to figure out how to create and implement plans. There's two general ways, depending upon the nature of your economy and your politics. There's directed development. Some nations are very strong in terms of the requirement that it's a top-down directed form of development. It's a command economy set by the government, set by yearly plans or multi-year plans. And then there's other forms of approach which are really facilitated development, where we're driven by market economics. I would think that here in India we're driven by market economics more than we're driven by a command economy. And that means that we have to merge together these three big spheres of finance, politics, and technical work in order to be able to make a decent plan. It can't happen only by the government. It can't happen only by business. It needs to happen through a coalition of both the business that invests and the government that helps to guide. So in that context, I think that there's four key trends that we ought to think about here. And the list is there: the democratization of planning, sustainability, the jobs, housing, balance, and transportation efficiency. Let me speak about each one of these for a moment. The democratization of planning is really critically important. Planning is not a top-down business. You cannot command how to make a plan. If the technicians decide that this is what the plan will look like, and it's made without connection to the community, the members of the community, that plan fails. That plan fails because it won't be supported. If it's really a challenge, it'll bring out the worst in people. So we need to find ways to make sure that our planning process is built around a consensus that comes from the people in the community where the impact of the planning is to be felt. This is critically important for us to do. This means that we've got to look at decentralized decision-making rather than centralized decision-making. This means we have to think about local economics, not citywide or regional economics as it affects an area. And we need to build this in for the community. And this is a new planning paradigm that's being addressed throughout the world. And if planners aren't thinking this way, the plans aren't going to get carried out. So we need to bring the community into the planning process. We need to make sure that our visions are regional and local, not just global in terms of what the whole city could look like. We need to think about a strong vision that connects these decentralized programs or these local planning visions together for implementation. We have to build consensus from the bottom up, not from the top down. And in that manner, we'll be able to empower the private community and empower redevelopment. This is a major change in planning that's actually sweeping through the globe, if you will, and especially in strong democracies, such as India, it becomes a critical approach to making things happen rather than just making plans. The second trend to talk about is sustainability. An oft-used word, and usually it stops, and we say we have to be sustainable, and it seems to imply it's just the environment. It's not. It's more than the environment. If you're going to have a sustainable community, you're not only going to have environmental sustainability, you're going to have to sustain housing and sustain the housing market. You have to sustain the transportation system, and you have to sustain and keep a growing market going, because the market has to be a jobs machine that produces jobs for people, that feeds the economy. So if we want to define this sustainability, there's more elements than just the environment. There's the global economic and transportation linkages, how we connect to the larger aspects of the state, the nation, and the globe. There are intra-regional linkages, how we link our economies and transportation systems to other portions of the region, so they each build and support one another. So in that sense, sustainability works best when there's an emphasis on basically polynuclear development, smaller nodes that develop rather than a uniform mass that's there, because that allows for focusing on particular investments in particular areas, and it allows us to save a lot of the development that we have in place. The most sustainable house that you can build is one that already exists. And that's because you've already used the energy to build that house, and you've already altered the environment to build that house. So we ought to be able to maintain what's in place as a key sustainability measure. We need to have continuous job creation because the population grows, and we have to have an economy that does that, because if people can't sustain themselves economically, then all the other issues of sustainability become at loose ends. We clearly have to be energy efficient. We clearly have to manage our air and water quality as well, but we need to think about sustainability and the fact that everything's connected to everything else. And we have to be very thoughtful about the way we make investments and how it affects the other aspects of our built natural environment. One of the most important challenges I think that's here is the need to balance jobs and housing. What does that mean? That means that you don't live 2.5 hours away from the place that you work, so that you spend 5 hours commuting out of a day. That makes no sense. It makes no economic sense. It makes no physical sense. It makes no social sense. This is the great challenge that's faced here, trying to bring jobs and housing opportunities closer together rather than farther apart. And for that reason, we need to look at issues of job creation in the context of the way the residential development patterns exist. We need to think the other way about housing resources in the context of the way investment patterns exist. We need to figure out how to minimize travel times and distances, whether we do that by improved mass transit or whether we do it by bringing together and closer these two jobs and housing areas. And one of the best solutions we can think of, which actually Indian cities are very good at, is mixing uses. And that is mixing residential and living environments and working environments relatively together. So if we're going to do this, we know the first thing we have to do is figure out how to integrate housing with major job production areas. Now, I'm not suggesting that we move to the old Chinese model where you had a factory and you had the factory dorms right on the same site. But I am suggesting that we need to think carefully about the fact that we don't want to encourage more sprawl and outward growth for housing in one direction and more sprawl and outward growth for jobs and industries in the other direction. That works against what we're trying to achieve here in terms of quality of life. The best way to think about this is in terms of mixed-use development nodes that are well-served and connected by mass transportation. We cannot build enough lanes to carry automobile traffic in a city that's somewhere between 15 and 20 million, depending who's counting. We have to look, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but we have to look to making more efficient transit and more efficient transit in terms of the numbers of options and the ability to move over shorter distances rather than longer distances. And we have to figure out ways to integrate goods movement into the job locations in a manner that doesn't clog the transportation arteries that are carrying people, which is another great challenge that we face. And to that end, one of the big challenges we have is that our reuse plans need to be very sensitive. When a hunk of land becomes available, whether it's mill land, redevelopment, or whatever, we need to think not, well, how do we just do some development on this property that will optimize the land value? We have to figure out how we can use this property to help make a better balance between jobs and housing within the city. Cities evolve through redevelopment. They either expand into the hinterlands or they recycle urbanized land. I've used the word redevelopment because when you expand into the hinterlands, when you expand into the agricultural land, you're redeveloping the land. You're taking away that option of having agriculture close in, or you're taking away aspects of village life that you have to address and deal with. So both of these approaches need to be done in a very thoughtful manner in terms of trying to make sure that we minimize the distances between and the time between jobs and housing locations. So how do we do this? Well, first we need clear policy that says we want to make sure we do that. Second, we need to look about creating public-private partnerships to make this happen, because we know that the housing development and the real estate development falls in the private market, but the goals and the framework gets set and the transportation and infrastructure investments that get made happen on the government side. And we have to merge this. We have to have clear public-private partnerships to help carry out this policy. Sometimes we have to prime the pump. Sometimes we have to build the highways or improvements first to guide the land use investment rather than to chase the land use. If transportation chases land use development, it fails to keep up. If land use is directed by transportation investment, there's a relationship and a pattern that is viable and sustainable. And to move in that direction requires strong leadership from both the private sector and the public sector, and an encouragement of mixed-use planning principles rather than single-use planning principles that creates isolated communities of residential area and isolated areas of industrial development. That brings us to the last trend that's happening, and that is working on transportation efficiency. This is probably the key element, because as I mentioned earlier, if transportation chases land use decisions, you'll never catch up. Because once the land use is made, there's no room to put the transportation improvement in. And transportation investments are what generates the value and interest in land. Land is not worth developing if you can't get to it. So the framework that we establish for the transportation system that's tied to a market thinking rather than just to engineering thinking will structure the way land use is responded to in terms of the development community. So we need to make sure we work with new technologies, as you're doing here in Mumbai. We need to combine multiple modes serving key nodes. What does that mean? That means that there are key centers and there are a variety of different transportation modes to get there. Different types of transit options, different approaches to managing automobile traffic, whether it looks to carpooling or congestion pricing or other tools as well. And we need to integrate land use planning with both the transit-based development and transportation-based development, and you can use that same model to take advantage of development that is attracted to airports, to have an airport-oriented development. So what are some of the key principles we should think about to reflect this trend? Well, a close relationship between transit and land use plan. I made that point earlier. Trying to optimize transit as the primary travel mode because it carries more people. It's the most efficient system. It can be done highly well. People travel to other cities, and you go to Singapore, and you look at the transit system there, and the density of that transit system, and you say, well, why can't we carry that out somewhere else like home? We need to look at development that forms more corridors and connects these nodes rather than allows a spread, because that's what transit serves best. We need to look at other tools, as I mentioned, like congestion pricing and other approaches to try to minimize the growth of continued auto use in the city. And we need to think about how to optimize development around the airports. We have new technologies emerging. They're exciting new technologies. It's how we use them to do this. Now, I'm looking at the transit map here of Mumbai. What's interesting in the transit map is that you see that we reflect the key corridors, and then there's a few crosslinks. But it's not as dense a transit mode as you would like. Let me give you an example. We're looking at Paris here. Now, there's a system that's built from the late 19th century on. But that circle, and that circle is the center of Paris. It's about a 2-kilometer radius, or ellipse, that's there. And in there is the metro. And the goal when that system was built is nobody had to walk more than 500 meters to get to a transit stop. Think of that. If all you have to do is walk 500 meters to get to the transit stop, you don't need the car. You can move around with great agility. You can transfer between lines and get where you're going. And that's the kind of goal that we're all looking to achieve here. We're looking to balance the transportation system in a manner that really achieves land use. And it's hard to read this diagram, but the moral of this story is you can look at different roads in terms of the markets they serve. The heavier roads serve, in this example, serve metropolitan markets. So they're the busy streets. And therefore, you want the major centers to be located near those interchanges because you can get the most people there. The lesser used roads are for the lesser used areas of town. And you have to devise that scale because if so, you can relate it to the kinds of land uses that are attracted to those locations because business invests their money based upon accessibility. How easy is it to get to the area? How much am I willing to pay for the buildings and development I want to have? So there's different ways to look at development impacts. You can create centers. You can create corridors. You can create a grid. Very purposeful thinking because they organize land use in a very specific way. You know, if you're going to space your transportation far apart and not have stops any more than a kilometer apart, you're probably looking at a series of centers. If you space those stops closer together, you start to build a corridor. There are a bunch of little centers that come together to create the corridor. And if you really want ubiquitous movement, you build a grid system to allow things to move in all directions. So there's ways to think about transportation to achieve land use goals and to achieve certain quality of life goals as well. Even at the airports, you can do this as well, because we have this great investment in a wonderful new airport, and we should be looking at how to create facilities for businesses that are really oriented to that mode of transportation. Again, to try, if we can, to minimize distant travel to get to points. Now, it's not easy to solve when you have one airport serving a whole region, but it's an issue to be considered as well. So, in summary, what the trends are about now is working to create a sustainable region. That region should have a broad vision that they could hold on to, that vision is related to a constituency for planning, and that means a series of smaller constituencies where the planning has been developed by them and supported by the community, and then united in one larger vision. The process, then, is as important as the product. How plans are made and how decisions are made is critical, because the tool here is to build consensus. If we're able to get consensus among the residents of a village or a neighborhood or a larger community that certain things should be done, then they'll be able to be done. But if we try to deliver the answer to a community, that answer may be answering a question that's not in their heads, it's only in your heads. So we need to focus on that. Because if we bring forward a plan with strong leadership and advocacy from the bottom up, then the private sector will be able to step in and begin to implement public policy in that direction, because many of the barriers to investment become removed. The time barrier to make something happen, the support barrier within the community. And so these trends, the notion of democratizing the planning process, of maintaining sustainability, of reducing the jobs housing difference, of increasing transportation efficiencies, are being felt across the entire world, and indeed, there is no better place to apply these than here in Mumbai. Thank you.
If I may please request Mr. Pollock to kindly remain on the stage. If I may please re-invite Mr. Leslie to please come back on the stage. I'd like to request Ms. Preeti Sharma, Vice President Marketing with Gazania Shelters, to please come on stage and present a token of gratitude to our speaker, Mr. Leslie Pollock.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you once again, sir, for those invigorating perspectives that you've shared with us.